conservation, community, education, and recreation here in this region. Privileged to work for all of you and with all of you. So I had the opportunity to meet Nils Christoffersen for the first time when I was down in right outside of Lake Tahoe. I was invited to speak at a meeting for Rural Voices for Conservation Coalition, which is an organization that Nils founded. We're one of the founders, right?
Yeah.
And it introduced me to a whole network of people that I had not met through the land trust community. And some of the conversations there were so exciting to me and so interesting that I knew that they were conversations that I wanted to bring back to our community. And one of those conversations was one that Nils was having there about the stewardship economy. And that was a new phrase for me, a new term for me. And the more I listened to him, the more that I knew that this type of work was something that we would find very near and dear to our hearts here, because we love the land so much. We're grateful every day for the land. The land gives us so much in terms of the lake, the water, the mountains, the weather, and it's why many of us choose to live here. And so the thought of helping to take care of the land and using that as an economy was quite interesting. I had worked on a project where it was focused on the recreation economy. And there are great things that can come from a recreation economy as well. But this new turn on thinking about the stewardship economy and how that can help support the vitality of your community was something that I knew needed to come back here. We needed to start talking about it. We needed to start learning about it as a community. And so I reached out to Nils, and he just happened to be driving through on his way to Montana. And I was so grateful. So like 3 months ago, I was like, I will grab you on this day so that we can have this conversation. So I'm excited to have you all in the room with me here today, and anybody out there that's listening through our live stream as well. So with that, I will turn it over to you.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here. So thank you all for coming out tonight. I am Nils Christoffersen. I'm the Executive Director of Wallowa Resources, which is a community-based organization in Wallowa County that was founded in 1996. Let's see if I can do this. No? Okay, 1 second. But I was not a founder of that organization. I joined I've been there for 26 years, so I got there in 1999 with my wife, who is Norwegian, as some of us were talking about, and my 2 kids, who were both born when we were working and living in southern Africa, in Zimbabwe. And that is part of the story, which is why I'm sharing that with you. And just a little bit of background then, I was born in Northern Virginia. My father's family has a mix of, rural farm, fishing, transportation life in Norway. And my mother's family, for about 10 generations, was involved in farming in New England. And then her father got into education and was a teacher in New Hampshire and Maine, and then started working for a graduate school of education. My parents met in Scotland, and then eventually settled in Virginia, which is where I was born. One of the things that also is part of my sort of journey in my career and my passion is in Northern Virginia. When I was growing up, we lived south of Alexandria, and we were still surrounded by, or not surrounded by, but there were still dairy farms and open land when I was young. And it just happened to be when America Online was developing, and expansion of military spending there with the Pentagon, and it became the fastest growing place in the United States. So all of the land was bought up and converted to houses, malls, and other forms of development. And that stuck with me because when we were younger, we used to go and play on those farm fields and sled in the winter and do all that, and we kind of lost some of that space, and we also lost that connection to sort of a small scale agrarian setting. But I eventually went on. I actually didn't know most of my life what I wanted to do. I worked on a kibbutz in Israel. I worked with a small-scale fishing operation off the coast of Norway. I worked on a very big sheep ranch in Australia, 21,000 merino sheep. And then I worked for a small woodland owner, not so small, actually like 40,000 acres in Norway as a forester. That got me a job with the Norwegian Forestry Society, and I was sent to Botswana to do an inventory of 3 million hectares, like 5-6 million acres of Miamba woodlands, of savanna woodland in northern Botswana. And eventually I started working for IUCN. Does anybody know what IUCN is here? Okay. It's the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. It's based in Switzerland. It's a very big conservation organization. Actually the biggest conservation organization in the world, but it's one nobody's ever heard of. They have several country offices, and then they have 6 scientific commissions. And I worked for them in the regional office for Southern Africa. And while I was there, we had a Pan-African symposium on communities and sustainable use. And this was part of the keynote discussion, because in Africa, part of the story was with the colonial era, all the colonial empires followed sort of the European model of creating national parks and protected areas that were exclusively for the benefit of the colonists. And it displaced the local communities and broke their ancestral and cultural and economic attachment to the land and the resources. And so he talked about this spectrum from the colonial area where conservation was practiced against the interests of the people, then sort of over the beginning of the, or late 19th century, early 20th century, they started doing more of a paternalistic view that they were doing it for the benefit of the community that really wasn't smart enough to take care of these resources themselves. And now we were in the 80s and 90s in this era where we recognize the value and the need to do this as partners. So conservation with the people, where the benefit of conservation would actually accrue to, be delivered to the people that lived with and around the resources. And the vision is that we can get our systems right, our political systems, economic systems, education systems, value systems, so that conservation is just natural, what we naturally do, right? It is the natural practice that we do. And in saying that, what was interesting to me as I came back here is this latter stage of what was presented in 1996 in Zimbabwe is very much what the tribes in my area, and probably the tribes in your area, speak about in terms of the original creation myth, where the creator brought forth all of creation prior to bringing forth the people and asked them what they were going to do to support the people, and exchange promised that the people would care for them as well. And so the Nez Perce tribe and the Confederated Tribe of the Umatilla Indian Reservation speak about reciprocity, that they honor and realize or try to live a reciprocal relationship where they know they benefit from food, clothing, homes, etc., for natural resources, and in return they will care for you. So it was good Katie talked about a recreation economy, because that was part of the history of coming up with this term. When I got to Wallowa County, we had lost our mills, and I'm probably going a little bit out of order now on the slide, so you'll see that in a second, but we had lost our mills, and they had been for 80 years probably the largest private sector payroll provider in the county, with some of the highest wages, and really significant, as you all know, because beyond just the wages in the private sector, there was a strong Forest Service presence, and there were county payments coming back to support multiple functions of county government. That had been lost by 1995, 96, and the question was, what comes next? And our county commissioners had already brought together the tribes, the mills, people working in the mills, the livestock permittees, the artists in our community, pretty much the business owners, and started talking about, we can see the changes coming as early as 1989, 1990, with new listings under the Endangered Species Act. And in our area, it was Chinook salmon and then steelhead. We can see that change is coming. What are we going to do to prepare for that? And they had brought people together to create a Wallowa County Nez Perce Tribe Salmon Habitat Restoration Plan, in the hopes that by enacting that under county law, basically making that part of the county's land use plan, that all land use would be considered with a lens about whether it hurt or not salmon habitat in the county. In the hopes then that the federal government would give special consideration to Wallowa County's land use, since we took this action prior to Chinook being listed under the Endangered Species Act. They didn't get any special consideration from NOAA Fisheries or Fish and Wildlife Service thereafter. But what it did do was create this sort of the relationships and the practice of working together long before Wallowa Resources was created or I arrived. And so that the seeds for collaboration and partnership were really well settled by the time the mill shut down. Thank you very much. And they started talking about what comes next. And some people wanted to see if we could recruit another big employer, some other manufacturer. They started talking with like Buck Knives, for example. Could you bring a factory into Wallowa County? They were talking about maybe seeing if we could create a call center. Anything that would put a lot of people back to work. All these hundreds of people that had lost jobs in the mills and in the woods. They even talked about whether we should build a prison, just again as another way to put people back to work. But the county commissioners had all these meetings then. They continued this process of convening people to get their input. And everybody said, we don't want to change. We want to maintain the custom and culture of working the land, caring for the land, and all the other benefits that generates for this place. But we recognize that we can't go back in time. We've got to innovate. We've got to be creative. We've got to reimagine what that looks like. And when they came to that decision, they decided it would be helpful to have a nonprofit partner. So a community-based organization governed by residents of Wallowa County that could bring in other sources of capital and basically help drive some R&D. We could take risks. We could do pilot projects. We could see what worked. And over time, as other people started to define what we were doing, or suggesting that we should be a recreation economy or a restoration economy or a conservation economy or whatever, blue economy, we were like, no, we want to define what we're doing ourselves. And we came up with this term, the stewardship economy, and the two key things are we recognize the need and responsibility to manage for the sustainability of both the land and the communities, and we see the people and the land as the most valuable assets that we have. And we don't want to lose those. We don't want to just become some other place across the Intermountain West that maybe has cheap labor and cheap land and can become Disneyland or something else, right? We want to try to stay true to ourselves. We think this idea of a stewardship economy is important for a lot of reasons. And the blue here are what Headwaters Economics typed as isolated, sparsely populated rural counties. And I think if my memory is correct, it's something like 203 of the 415 counties in the western states. And we think that our greatest contribution to our own families, our communities, to our counties, to the state, to the western region, and the country as a whole, is to produce healthy food, sustainable wood products, renewable energy, fresh water resources, wildlife habitat, recreation opportunities, carbon sequestration and storage, etc. And that really focusing on the prosperity of our place, in a place that is not exclusively limited to those tasks, but keeps those tasks front and center in all of its economic development, land use decisions, is going to create the greatest value. Unfortunately, and you guys probably know that, Headwaters Economics also characterize most of these counties as being in long-term recession, with much higher unemployment, aging populations, much lower wages, much more volatile income than urban counties and counties that were immediately adjacent to urban counties, or had strong transportation and economic connections through airports, rail lines, or other. The other thing, just as a side note, that Headwaters Economic pointed out after the recession is that, and this is Economic Innovation Group on the left actually, is that for the last 30, 40 years, there's been an increased concentration of population, wealth, and business opportunity, growth, economic opportunity in the United States. It hasn't been evenly distributed. And if I showed that map from the previous recessions up until this one, rural counties always led in new job creation and employment after each recession up until the Great Recession. And then something dramatically has changed. And this other map is that was from last year. The orange and the blue represents 50% of the country's GDP. So that, and again, for us, it just speaks to we're missing an opportunity, right? We're missing an opportunity to create value and really invest in the opportunity to generate jobs, businesses, prosperity, and all this other part of our landscape. And it's been, as you all know, I'm sure, it's been concentrated in fewer and fewer sectors, particularly in finance, technology, information services, entertainment, and we really haven't taken advantage of what this country as a whole can produce and offer. And that's, I don't need to repeat all that, but we just have a lot of opportunity in the West. This is going back in time, then I kind of spoke about this, that, let me shrink this down a little bit.
Pull the table back.
Does that work? So that's when we closed, and I didn't do enough research on Sandpoint. Did you guys have a lot of mills that shut down too?
We used to have 7.
7, okay.
Long time ago.
All right. When our mills shut down right around 94, 95, it meant, we lost a lot of people that worked in the mills and in the woods, but then at the time, Oregon and Washington produced half of the nation's timber. So Region 6 produced about 6 billion board feet of the country's 12 billion board feet of timber production. And as a result of that, Region 6 got a much higher percentage of the Forest Service's budget than any other region, because we were the biggest timber producers, and at that time, and for about 80 years, the Forest Service's two main objectives were protect clean water and a sustained yield of timber. When there was a needed environmental awakening and shift, and we shifted from sustained yield of timber to ecosystem management, then there was no longer a reason to give more money to Region 6. So they equalized the budgets, because everybody had ecosystem services to manage for. And so in addition to losing all these jobs at the mills, we lost 65% of our Forest Service employees. That then meant we had smaller school enrollment, so the schools laid off teachers, the schools shrunk by 50%, went down to a 4-day school week, and then the hospitals almost went bankrupt because they went from 80% insured patients to 20% insured patients, and had much fewer patients that could pay all their bills. So we had a big crisis to try to respond to, which again led, in part, there was a lot of different responses, but in part, the creation of Wallowa Resources. And about 3 months after we were created, the county commissioners passed a resolution recognizing us as a key partner in the economic development of the county. And that was really important as a nonprofit in a conservative western rural place to have that support and recognition from the county. As I mentioned earlier, our whole county is the ancestral land of the Nez Perce, the Nimiipuu, and the Cayuse, Umatilla, and Walla Walla people who are under the Confederated Tribes of Umatilla Indian Reservation. And one of the Nez Perce tribal council members, I think actually at the time he was the director of fisheries, was a founding board member of Wallowa Resources, and for most, we're 29 years old now, and I think for 27 of 29 years, we've always had a Nez Perce enrolled member on our board.
Was that Cy Whitman?
Yeah, well done. Did you know him?
Oh, very well.
Yeah, it was sad. He was actually in our office with youth last summer, because we're partnering with them on sort of a youth stewardship workforce development program, and it was amazing to have both the young sort of tribal managers working with the kids, but then Cy and a couple other elders sharing their stories and wisdom with them. Yeah.
I'll talk about it later, Nils, but I just produced an hour-long radio documentary, and Silas is one of the main speakers.
Oh, fabulous. Yeah.
All about the Wallowas.
Oh, cool. So in 1996, when we were created, we had a much longer mission statement. That's now our mission statement. But our mission statement, the founding mission statement, was to promote forest, watershed, and community health, create family wage jobs and business opportunities, and broaden understanding of the link between community and ecosystem health. So we had this very broad mission to support sort of, just any effort to bring some prosperity and opportunity back to the county, but very much tied to this notion of caring for our forests, our watershed, our land. And so now we've simplified it to this statement, and we have 3 operational divisions. So our biggest one is working in forest, range, watershed restoration and management. Then we have a strong K-12 youth education program, in addition to working with regional universities, both at the undergraduate and graduate level. And then we have a community and economy division, which for most of our history was actually run through a wholly owned for-profit subsidiary that could invest in businesses, including invest in a wood processing facility to try to bring some value-added manufacturing back to the county. Now it owns property, both commercial real estate and workforce housing, apartments and rentals. It participates in the ownership and management of a community-owned forest, which you guys have 2 here, right? And it does a lot of renewable energy work, and then we manage for the Forest Service. The Forest Service was about to shut down 104 of our campsites, so we manage 104 of the campsites for the Forest Service. And this kind of just shows what it looks like. Yeah, this is our program. A big investment in monitoring, shared learning, riparian forest range, invasive weed management, workforce housing, community energy, local resources, that's including the community forest. And then education and learning is strongly focused on this outdoor experimental learning, but through landowner workshops, training sessions, and through RVCC, we also do policy and peer-to-peer learning. And then more recently, because it's, when we started, we were dealing with a situation of very high unemployment. Today, we're in a situation where most employers in the county find it difficult to recruit and retain staff. And so can we develop staff within the county that will fill all these vacant positions? So we are working on that. When we talk about the stewardship economy, we're not talking about something exclusive. We recognize the importance of economic diversification. We don't want to be, tied to this and then go through boom and bust cycles. But what is important is that it has enough political, social support that it doesn't get overrun by some other idea. And a lot of times in beautiful mountain communities, that often can be recreation and land development, land use development, housing development. So you move from ranching the land to ranching the view, as some people say. And yeah, so we support recreation. There's a lot of recreation in Wallowa County, but we just don't want it to get too big, right? The cornerstones of this thing are a very big investment and focus on being good stewards of our land, particularly our forest and rangelands, but our riparian areas and farms. And initially, we started by just paying people to go do restoration work. But that can only go so far. So we started looking at how do we begin to support value-added businesses that can sustain land stewardship over time. The very simplest one that we did, is super easy, is we worked with OSU Extension to have Wallowa County be one of the first counties with a weed-free hay and straw certification, so that there might be a market and some additional value for landowners that were paying attention to managing weeds and protecting soil health in the production of their crops. But then we tackled this more challenging thing, which is how do we create value from small diameter logs? And as restoration began to focus more on fuel reduction, fire risk management, the proportion of small diameter logs in any forest treatment went from about 15 to 20%, anywhere up to 50% or more. So you're handling a lot of small sticks. Most of them didn't have a market, and typically they just would have been piled and burned in the woods. So we created a mill that is designed to take that and try to generate as much value as we can from that in pretty simple products right now. So the core of that is bundled firewood, heat-treated bundled firewood, pole products, everything from residential fencing to farm poles like hop poles, because the Yakima Valley I think produces 40% of the world's hops. And we also do clean mill chips that go into pulp and paper, into paper manufacturing in Wallowa. And then we're experimenting with other things. So we do wood straw, which is a restoration product to replace straw bales after a fire to slow soil erosion. Well, we can talk about that later. And then we are also working on biochar and trying to sort of tie forest restoration to regenerative farming and improvement of soil health. Access to capital is probably one of the hardest things for us because we're talking about smaller scale types of investments and enterprises than most investors are interested in. And we can talk about that later, but that's a key thing that we're trying to work on is bring more capital in to support these small scale enterprises. The education, training, and R&D, starting with the kids through to the young professionals into a young professional workforce development program. And then with RDCC, really trying to aggregate voices from across the rural West, from Alaska to New Mexico, to bring some new ideas into both state and federal policy that would support the stewardship economy. And it was like 2 or 3 years ago, Secretary Vilsack talked about being proud as Secretary of Agriculture that he had just presided over the largest or the biggest farm sales revenue year that the country had ever experienced. And he was excited to celebrate that until his staff told him that 11% of the farms had captured 85% of the revenue. And that many of the small and mid-sized farms were struggling. And so he raised that as sort of just, you know, if we're going to be supporting more opportunity across this country, across all that blue area he showed in the map, and if we're really going to take advantage of the stewardship economy, we need to figure out how do we support small and mid-sized farms, ranches, sawmills, and other types of businesses. So, you know, I mentioned that earlier. We have spent a lot of time and a lot of money and built a lot of partnerships around forest restoration. That's where we started because the mill shut down. And so we were trying to put forest workers back to work in the woods. Today, that started from like 40-acre projects, 1,000-acre projects, 3,000-acre projects, eventually like a 75,000-acre project. And now we manage the Northern Blues Restoration Program, which is 10.3 million acres, 2 states, 3 tribal lands, 3,000 private landowners, 2 national forests. It's the largest in geography forest restoration or all lands restoration program in the country. And it's generating a lot of activity in all these isolated rural counties. We do renewable energy. We're supporting regenerative ag, mostly on this is one of my neighbors actually, the Lazy Mule Farm down there. Most of what we do is really with livestock producers and ranchers, but we're just beginning to explore opportunities with our smaller farms and looking at how we can build some cooperation and maybe a stronger food hub type model. I mentioned value-added manufacturing and then the community ownership of land as just an alternative as some of these large parcels of land go up for sale. And our community forest is 1,800 acres. It's on the east moraine of Wallowa Lake. It's from a University of Idaho Moscow graduate student who did a sense of place study with a survey out to all of our community members. This area was rated as the highest value place of all of our residents. Didn't matter how old they were, didn't matter how long they lived there, didn't matter whether they were Republican or Democrat or anything. They all thought this was sort of the most important place in Wallowa County. So the county commissioners, Wallowa Resources, Wallowa Land Trust, Oregon Parks and Recreation Department, and Nils Christoffersen worked together to buy this land and set it up as a community forest. And then they invest, we do a lot of investment in small businesses and training and development of our youth and workforce. I don't know if you want this history, I can do this quick and then we're done for Q&A, but it's an incremental startup. So we started in 1996, and for about 3 years, it was mostly community conversation. It was building the board, sort of coalescing around the vision and the mission, and having community conversations about what should we do. And one of the board members had remembered growing up along the Wallowa River and all the fish he used to be able to catch, and then after World War II, when heavy equipment came back, they straightened the river and really messed up a lot of the spawning and rearing grounds for our fish, and it just wasn't good fishing anymore. So he wanted to re-meander the river on his ranch. So that was one of the very first projects that we did. And then we started working with people doing sort of thinning work, wetland restoration work, livestock watering, improvement work, anything that we could pay people to go back and do. That started then, as we went from small projects, we created what is now called a Forest Collaborative. We didn't call it that at the time. We called it the Wallowa County Community Planning Process. And that's when we scaled up to 75,000 acres, looking at the whole watershed. How could we improve all aspects of that watershed, ridgetop to ridgetop? And that project proved to be so successful that it really sort of built a lot of momentum for the rest of our program. It generated $6 million of benefit back to the county based on OSU extensions estimates. We had the first timber sale in the county that hadn't been appealed by the environmental groups in about 10 or 15 years. They had actually been part of designing it. We did 34 miles of salmon habitat restoration and fish passage barrier removal. We just did the whole spectrum of work and employed a lot of people, and it built a lot of momentum for what we were doing. And because of that, then the BLM asked us to start a collaborative noxious weed program. We invested in community smallwood solutions to try to generate more value from small diameter wood. Launched our youth programming, started managing campsites when they were about to be closed. Community smallwood solutions became integrated biomass resources when private investment came in. And then the hospital, we built a new hospital. We did. The county built a new hospital, and the old hospital was, nobody wanted it. They tried to sell it. They tried to give it to the county. Nobody would take it, and it was beginning to be a liability on the hospital's books. So they asked us if we would take it, and we actually said no twice. And eventually we took it, and after we took it, it actually has been fabulous, because we now have 34,000 square feet of commercial space that NRCS, you guys know NRCS? Yeah. Okay, NRCS, Farm Services Administration, Soil and Water Conservation District, the Grand Ronde Model Watershed, Oregon Department of Water Resources, the Water Master, Oregon Department of Ag, their Eastern Oregon weed guys in there, Freshwater Trust, some of the local regenerative ranchers have offices in there, Energy Trust of Oregon that supports renewable energy. So we're all in one building, which means that we're seeing each other all the time, and it's really spurring a lot of strength in our sort of creativity in our partnerships and just being able to leverage resources. I think I skipped one probably, but that's, yeah, I mean, we just kept growing. It's probably what I should just say, and then open it up for questions.
Could you keep that slide up?
Oh, sure.
Thank you.
I can leave the slide deck too with Kate.
Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, if you want me to talk about it, we went from, when the schools went to a 4-day school week, we started offering Friday outdoor school so that working families knew their kids were in a supervised environment on Friday, and one of them, they didn't have to worry about what was happening to their kids on Friday. And that became very popular, so then we expanded to other in-school and after-school and summer school programs. In 2015, we expanded our focus on forest restoration from public lands to private lands because I was serving on the Oregon Board of Forestry at the time, and there was a presentation that the engagement of small woodland owners in actually managing their land was less than 20%. Less than 20% of small woodland owners had a management plan, and within a 5-year period of time had actually done any forest management of that land. And some of them within a 10, 20-year period of time. And we wanted to get forest landowners to understand that forest health, wildfire risk, wildlife habitat, it all happened at a scale bigger than their property, and they really needed to be part of an all-land sort of community effort to do good forest stewardship. So we created my Blue Mountain Woodlands, which was modeled after my Wisconsin Woodlands, a very successful program in Wisconsin. We helped form the Wallowa Mountain Hells Canyon Trails Association. We have 4 wilderness areas, and we have the Hells Canyon National Recreation Area. One of our wilderness areas, the Eagle Cap Wilderness Area, is the largest wilderness area in Oregon. And I think we have like 1,800 miles of Forest Service trails. And because of all the staff reductions and budget reductions, they were clearing and keeping open less than 200 miles a year. And so all the people that were there and used to this much bigger network were upset that some of these trails that their families had used historically were no longer really passable, and that also as tourism and recreation increased, it was being concentrated on fewer and fewer trails, so they were all getting more crowded. So we created that, and that was a change for us because that was our first sort of commitment to volunteer activities. Before that, it was just about putting people back to work, and we really wanted to, we ignored volunteerism because we wanted to just get people back to work. At this stage, it was really important to get more of the community involved in what we were doing and give them an outlet to contribute on something that everybody was really passionate about. That's its own nonprofit now. We developed some of our, we were part of modernizing irrigation. Do you guys do that up here? Switching from flood and open ditches to pipelines and center pivots? Huh? No, all dry here? Okay.
No irrigation.
Okay. So in our county, there was a big switch to look at modernizing irrigation systems. And in part, you know, and the sort of hydrological analysis varies from place to place to place. It doesn't always work. But in part, we were looking at, can we conserve the amount of water diverted from a river to ensure there's enough flow for our Chinook, our steelhead, et cetera, but without compromising irrigation and agricultural production. And from moving from an open ditch flood irrigation system to a pipeline with pressurized sprinklers, you can do that. And we found out with our first project where we piped a 4-mile ditch that we had 80 pounds of pressure in the pipeline just sitting there at the end. And there's a ranch house right next to it, and you can put a turbine in there and generate enough power to offset the power bill for the ranch house. So we started looking at other ways to use microhydro in these irrigation systems to offset farm and home costs, energy costs. The East Moraine Partnership, which created the community forest. And then in 2020, again, because of the Board of Forestry, I was on the board with a guy who used to be the regional manager for Boise Cascade, and then he became the president of Eastern Oregon University in La Grande. So we traveled to Salem back and forth all the time together, and we talked about the importance of a university or a community college or any higher level education institution for rural revitalization, and how could we engage the university, its faculty, its students more in economic and community development. So we created a joint venture between EOU and Wallowa Resources called the Rural Engagement and Vitality Center, which basically gets faculty and students to do real life projects with a whole bunch of different communities and different types of projects, so that they're engaged in helping with everything that we're doing in Northeast and Eastern Oregon. 2020, we became a recipient of the Collaborative Forest Landscape Restoration Program funding from USDA. That's a 10-year commitment of funding, and that funds that 10.3 million acre restoration program that I mentioned. We developed a film called The West is Burning that's available on YouTube if you want to see it, that speaks about some of the sort of reasons that we're now experiencing much larger megafires and the ways communities can come together in response to those risks and challenges. And then in 2023, we launched our, right at the end, we worked with the county on a community energy plan and then launched our workforce housing division. Right? So, questions? Yeah.
So, your.org, how many people do you employ? How much money does it cost to run your organization and keep everyone afloat, head above water with all the exciting things that you do?
So today, we are about 20 people, but we have 2 fiscal sponsorships, so Rural Voices for Conservation Coalition, this policy coalition, and the Rural Engagement and Vitality Center, the partnership with the university. We are their fiscal sponsors. And then we have the Working Home subsidiary. So with the fiscal sponsorships and the subsidiary and Wallowa Resources, it's about $7 million. Yeah, but we haven't always been like that, and I would say the last 5 years it's grown a lot. For most of our history, when I got there, we were less than $100,000, and it took quite a while to break $1 million, and then for many, many years, we were sort of hovering between $1 million and $2 million, and maybe 8 staff. We also made a very conscientious decision that we were not going to try to become the organization that did all the work, right? We were the broker, facilitator, sort of conduit for resources, technical assistance, financial assistance, partnerships, innovation, but we weren't going to do all the work. And so we try to keep, each program staff is actually quite small because we're really working with our local contractors and our landowners and our agency and tribal partners to do the work.
So when you guys identified, I think you said it was 1,200 acres down there that was important to your community.
Yeah.
And you went and met with the county commissioners. 1, how much was it? And 2, how did you guys raise the money?
Yeah. So it probably doesn't matter, but it was 1,800 acres.
Yeah, I didn't know if you said
but
$600.
In the end, it was we negotiated a purchase price of $6 million, of which 3.4 came from Forest Legacy. About $1 million came from Oregon Parks and Recreation Department, and then we cobbled together the rest. I think there was a couple major donors in it, like $250,000. The Nez Perce tribe came in at about $300,000. Some foundations came in sort of in that range too. And then there was lots of local donation campaigns all the way down to the $50 and $25 donors.
Have you guys ever done like, or solicited for like a county tax to purchase any kind of land like that?
We have not, no. And part of that, and I don't know Idaho, the way Idaho does this, so the example I'm about to share may not be relevant here at all.
Katie would.
But in Oregon and in Wallowa County, there's a 3% limit to the increase on property taxes year to year. And then there's a total limit on how much, there's a limit on then where that goes. And you've already got school districts, the sheriff, et cetera, soil and water conservation district, Oregon State Extension. And so if you add a new user of property taxes, there's compression in everybody else's revenue. And so there's a real reluctance or a real sort of, you give serious consideration whether you're going to add something new to that, because you're just dividing up a steady pie into more slices, right?
Nils, I've been fortunate to hike the East Moraine property. I spent the summer 2021 in Wallowa for 3 months. And I think and I was working on a salmon restoration project with the Nez Perce Fisheries in Joseph. And which just got completed, and I'll share that with you.
The one in
at the
Lost
end.
Dean?
It was the Lostine Weir, but it was coho reintroduction,
Right.
which
Yeah.
was extinct
Yeah.
locally in your county.
Yeah.
And now the possible sockeye reintroduction to Wallowa Lake. That's the subject of the documentary, as well as just tracing all of Silas's work for 50 years and the tribe's connection, cultural connection.
Right.
So I think when I spent that summer there, I was doing a lot of research, obviously, talking to a lot of people, whether it was ranchers like Liza Jane and the restoration project that she worked on, which was similar to the McDonald's.
Yep.
And the tribe that year was really, they bought the Hayes house that
Yep.
year.
Yep.
All kinds of things occurred. But I think my overall impression of the Wallowas was don't make the same mistakes Sandpoint has made. I've lived here 46 years, Bonner County. A lot of development that's gone just really poorly. And so I was really looking at those kinds of comparisons. I was just down there two weeks ago for a week, basically did a talk at the Giuseppe Center.
Oh, okay.
And I follow the Willology folks and Oregon Wild folks.
Yep.
So I have a couple questions.
Great.
One is, when I was down there, and you were just talking about the irrigation changes, and we don't have that issue here at all. Southern Idaho, yes. But I was just stunned, and this is the last week in May, first part of June, I was there, is just how much water is being used irrigating, and the fact that the fields are mostly very water consumptive fields like alfalfa. So I was just wondering if Wallowa Resources is addressing some of those issues. And I was also just interested in the whole conservation issue around other species, like the salmon. I know the tribe is working really hard, but I know right now the Wallowa Lake Dam restructuring is in litigation, sadly, because of irrigators. That's my understanding. And I don't know if that's true.
Okay.
They can't talk about it because it's in litigation.
Okay.
So I just left that out of my presentation at the Giuseppe. But could you talk about some of the work you're doing regarding the land as far as wildlife And I mean, you are blessed with the eco-cap wilderness and all the other wilderness areas around, and all of the amazing rivers. People don't realize that the Wallowas is one of the most incredible places. All 5 species of salmon spawn there, and so on. But what is, I did meet with one of your staff members in 2021, Emily Brannigan, and I don't know if she's still around.
Yeah, she does youth education.
Okay, but what are you
Right.
doing in, regarding other species or the wildlife conservation, some of the things the Wallology is doing, for example? How do you interface with those groups?
So,
And the tribe,
yeah, so
now, today, not 10 years ago.
No, today. We work with the tribe almost every single day. I actually was just talking with Aaron Miles on my way up here about work that we want to do to help them with the old Ace Place. We're talking regularly with them about the irrigation issues and the dam. As you probably know, there's been, since the creation of the Oregon Watershed Board, what's now OWIP, there's been something like, I don't know, millions and millions of dollars invested in riparian restoration, including fish passage barrier removal, and anything we can do to improve the condition for salmon, because it is part of our land use plan.
Okay.
And we've been close partners with the tribe and the Grand Round Model Watershed and all the other implementing agencies that are working to restore the riparian areas. And a key issue now, most of even the tribal wildlife, fisheries biologists tell me that today the habitat is so improved that we actually have more habitat than fish using it. So we have more rooms in our hotel than we've got visitors. The challenge for us is a little bit less habitat than it was in the 80s, 90s, and now it is where I think you were getting at, it's late summer in-stream flow. So in the late summer, in parts of it, the flow particularly in the lower valley, isn't always enough to allow for fish passage. And that's where modernizing the irrigation systems to reduce the amount of diversions is a key part of the strategy. Also renovating the dam, where I think it is 5,000 acre feet will be granted to the tribe, and they will be able to request its release. Anytime they see that the river levels are getting too low, the tribe will ask the ditch master, the person managing the dam, to release more water, to allow for that passage. And Dave Johnson, who you know, obviously, right? He has said over and over to us and to other people that the partnership they have with the irrigators there, and it's not, obviously, you can find individual actors that may not do this, but in general, that the partnership is so good that anytime they ask them to stop irrigating for 24 or 48 hours to allow for a flush of water for fish to get up past the diversion, then the irrigators respond. So there's quite a lot of effort around, particularly around salmon. And we've been working for several years with the tribe, both the Umatilla and the Nez Perce and Oregon Parks and Recreation Department, to do a restoration project above Wallowa Lake, so that when the sockeye come back, the spawning in the Wallowa River above the lake by the lodge and moving up towards the mountains is in much better condition than it is today. So that would be just on fisheries. And in terms of all other wildlife, that's really built into particularly our forest restoration designs. And there's always going to be debate, right? And there's some people like certain species more than other species. But when we look at trying to reduce wildfire risk, and we also look historically at the division of open and closed forest, of pine, large, Doug fir versus grand fir forest, right? We've transitioned to more closed forest and more grand fir species dominance, and that favors species, animals, wildlife that like closed forest. But it is not good for species that like open forest, and it's not good for the nest purse, huckleberry, and other first foods that they would collect and gather in an open forest. So we're trying to balance all of that when we work. No, sorry, I'll come to you, but he was waiting.
Hi, Nils. Thanks for coming. This is a fantastic presentation, super informative. I have a follow-up to Julie's question at first. Like your growth, obviously you guys are doing fabulous work and a lot of it. Your growth to a $7 million budget, how much of that is sustainable versus recurring, relying on grants going forward? And I'm just curious to get your thoughts of kind of headwinds in the current administration and other just challenges, what you guys are doing to try to kind of keep the lights on.
Yep. So, we're a nonprofit. So nonprofits, typically get grants and donations, right?
Right.
We're not a for-profit business, so we're not going to generate all of our own income. That being said, we generate about 10% of our own income. So we have federal grants and agreements, we have state funding, we have foundation funding, we have individual donors, and then we have earned income. So we have 5 sources of revenue. Historically, federal revenue would have been 30 to 35% of our annual budget over the past 10 plus years. With the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law, it went up. And we were asked to sort of plan for and prepare for more federal money by NRCS and the Forest Service, because they looked at that legislation and the budgets that were going to be allocated to them, and they were trying to plan those future disbursements. For us, it meant we were able to get a lot more work done with private, tribal, and national forest system lands in particular, as well as rangeland. Obviously, that's like this year, all of our funding was approved. So it was frozen in January. $4.3 million was frozen in January. But by April, it had all been through the process, and we were told we could continue to work.
Great.
We anticipate that in 2026, we will see reductions. And so we're trying to figure out how much could we cover with other sources of revenue, or do we need to tighten our belt and scale down a little bit? And we haven't figured that out yet.
Multiple questions. How large is your county, size-wise and population?
It is 2.2 million acres. Does that make, it's like 3,500 square miles? And it's 7,400 people.
So,
But it's 58% public land.
So, my interest is more on the policy-making side. How much do you work with the county commissioners during that beginning stages, 20 whatever years ago, the mill shut down? Because this county as a whole, I see, has, if you were to take a poll, like the gentleman in the back said, you had 1,800 acres that they had fought because as a whole, everybody thought this should be protected. I think if you were to take a poll of Bonham County, it would be all over the place. I think we have some key areas, but that's due to the size of the population and many factors. So what recommendations would you say that Mr. Land Trust can do to advocate for this kind of model on the county commissioner side? Because it's all over the place when it comes to policy.
Right.
It's all over the place when we talk to one group of people of where we should make that distinction. With your plan that you had, the stewardship economy, you said this is where the development's going to be. This is the riparian, area. You have a recreation in there, and where those distinctions are not clear, and everybody has their own definition of that. That we have people no development at all, and so from your experience with your nonprofit, because I think there needs to be more of that, these experts, these people that do have this interest in mind, instead of the private, there's a small group of people with a large voice.
Yeah.
That's not the economy, right? We're gonna hear from everybody else, and I think generally, like countywide, I think we all kind of have this mentality, yes, we want to preserve it, yes, we love it here, for those many reasons, but how to do it, what to preserve, that's very difficult.
Yeah, and I can share stories from our county and you can figure out what works here, because I don't know this place at all. But, you know, I think it's really important that you try to find, like, test your assumption. Is it true that the vast majority of people actually have some common ground? Which in our county definitely was true, right? And we had surveys, we had community visioning sessions. One of them had 700 people in a county of 7,000 that showed up, and sort of we're all aligned, right? But we also did more anonymous surveying and polling that would get 500 plus respondents, and we knew through the demographics that we were getting a good cross section of people. But I think more important than that is, when I first got there as somebody who was not from Wallowa County, they gave me 3+ months to do nothing but just go out and meet people and talk to people, drive their property, have coffee at their kitchen table with them, find out what, sort of really made them tick, what their vision and passion was and where they were having difficulty, so that we could begin to find things that resonated with everybody, like a common set of actions we could take that would be supported. And I think, particularly for this idea of a stewardship economy, making sure, or sort of trying to build partnerships with as many land managers, people actually engaged in this work, no matter what size, and being able to sort of build a group there that you could demonstrate to the county commissioners that there is something real here, that there's an alignment amongst all these different farmers, ranchers, forest landowners around what we're trying to do, I think would be key. And then beginning to try to work with them too about like what would help them most. And as we've done quite a lot around technical assistance and financial assistance to ranchers and forest landowners. And now, and early on, we did a lot more work around sort of trying to find some partners to start some value-added opportunities that would bring more higher margins back to the landowners. We kind of, for a lot of reasons, we got subsumed in that wood processing facility. We didn't have bandwidth to do much else, but we're beginning to really dive into that again. And I think that's another key piece is try to see if there's some other entrepreneurs that are ready to start something that would help all these landowners. But you got to show, I think, the county commissioners that there's a there there.
Right, that's the hard part. We're going through a comp plan change right now that will lead into a zone change all countywide, and it's difficult. I know the county's been around most of these sections, districts, if you will, within the county, and it's not easy.
And we know we have one advantage in Oregon that some of our western neighbors don't have, which is much stricter land use laws,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
So farmland, the smallest farm parcel in Oregon is 160 acres, and the smallest timber grazing is 240 acres.
But that comes down from the state level.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
So.
Yes, I just wanted to make a comment to this young man. The other thing that's interesting about that East Moraine property is it's a geologic wonder. Wallowa Lake is a glacial lake, like our lake. Very small compared to our lake, but it's a geologic wonder that I think all those diversity of groups really understand and appreciate. Here, the lake is kind of it, and, you know, and our mountain ranges, and all of the public land that is owned. So, you know, it would be hard to kind of come up with something here in Idaho. But, you know, and I've lived here a long time. But I have a question for you, Nils. What do you see, you know, when I was there that summer and the visits I've made since then? And again, I did a lot of comparison to Bonner County and North Idaho to the Wallowas, because it is such a remarkable place, and the people are really awesome people, and the various nonprofits and so on. But what do you see? You're also experiencing pressures of tourism, like we are here, especially since 2020. What do you see in the future for Wallowa Resources to somehow help control that, if there is a possibility of controlling that? Like the West Marine, for example.
Right. I mean, I think the main thing is to be engaged in land use so that we don't see a watering down of our working lands, like sort of a parceling out to create more second homes, vacation rentals, etc. We went, in the time I've been there, I think when I got there, it was like 12% of the homes were second homes or vacation rentals, and now it's over 25%. And that's, they've begun to put caps on that, so that's no longer allowed in the city of Joseph, and they put caps also in the city of Enterprise, right? So that's beginning to try to buffer against that. There were people that wanted to create a ski resort on Mount Howard, and you know, the community was very clear that that's not something we wanted to have in our county.
Can you expand a little on that? I'm curious, because it meets the recreation.
Yeah, but it's too big. It's too big. It would begin to dominate. That would be a drive, like a big destination resort or a significant improvement of the airport are two things that our community, anyways, this is not me, this is the community as a whole, think would begin to be a tipping point, that we would no longer then control the movement towards recreation and tourism that began to lessen the value and participation in what we call the stewardship economy.
And when you say too big, you're kind of referring from like a local ski hill versus to like a squaw or
Right,
a
yeah.
heavenly.
And we have a local ski hill that's a T-bar that is a cooperative. It's $150 for a family for a year membership, and then you have to work 4 days a year there.
Plus, it's up, Howard Mountain, Mount Howard, butts up against the Eagle Cap Wilderness, which is wilderness with a capital W.
It's just interesting because I brought that up, you said too big, because I think a good mirror of this kind of conversation is the Sago Bike Park. I think we had a lot of the community, just generally half were for and half were against, depending on how you looked at it, right? Conservation, like.
So we have that debate too, I'm sorry to interrupt,
please.
but so, you know, we have an old rail line that was key to the mills and to agriculture. The county, the two counties, Wallowa County, Union County, bought it when it basically was no longer being used by Northern Idaho, Burlington. So it's the Wallowa Union Railroad Authority now. It's not used that much anymore. So there's conversation, should it be a rails and trails? But there's a lot, we have not made it through that debate about whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. And in that case, it's less about it being too big, but about sort of, people don't want tourists like driving past their home, like biking past their homes and you know, around their agricultural activities. So we're still working, like, is that a plus or a minus? That's ongoing debate. And I would just mention one thing, like the East Moraine, as I said, was an incredible sense of place, but that was not the driver for the start of us. everything you said about it being a geologic wonder and really important for the tribe and for the local community and the lake, that's all true. But the driver really was, we lost the mills, we wanted to stay a natural resource-based economy, we wanted to stay connected to the land in general, not just the marine, and so we were trying to put people back to work in new and creative ways.
So what happens when we are a tourist-based economy, whether
Right.
you like it or not?
Right.
There's still a lot of people that hold on to, we were an ag-based economy,
Yep, right.
no longer. It sounds like we need to incentivize, not diminishing the tourist economy, but incentivizing.
No, and it's good, but I would also wonder, like we talk about, the fact, we're very, like you are, and or maybe even more so, I don't know how far you guys are from like a major urban area, but we're quite far, quite isolated. You know, and in the winter, sometimes we're totally isolated because the 2 roads that get out of our county can be shut down. And we talk about recreation and food as the 2 ways that we can connect with the larger population and begin to tell our story, right? And some of that may be through recreation, that you're actually connecting them to the food producers and the local craft producers and other people here, so that you're encouraging people to come here not just to play, but to learn and contribute to the prosperity of this community more broadly than just their recreation activities. So that's a conversation we're having a lot around.
Okay, well, I have one more question, John, and then we'll close. John?
Early on in your conversation, in your presentation, you mentioned conversations with stakeholders, you mentioned artists. What did the artists say?
That happened before I was there.
It's a big arts community,
Yeah.
Joseph anyway.
But they were on our board too, and I think they were all aligned with the vision. You know, the artists have been there for a long time, but they were, again, pre-me, because I'm not from there, but my understanding was in the 80s, for a lot of reasons, some bronze foundries started in Wallowa County that became actually quite famous. I mean, they were producing things for Europe. The bronze frame for the Constitution at the National Archives was cast in Joseph. Some of the wreaths at the World War II memorial on the mall were cast in Joseph. And with the bronze foundries there, obviously more artists came in, and now we've got a pretty diverse arts and culture community and a big arts Wallowa Valley. Well, we have the Wallowa Valley Arts Festival and an Esperance Arts Festival that are sort of part of both culture but also recreation. Right? I mean, they're bringing tourists in too.
Look up the Josephi Center for Arts and Culture and see what they do. It's incredible.
Okay.
And Katie, could I just say that if anybody wants to listen to the documentary about the Wallowa and salmon restoration, I have business cards I'm happy to hand out before you walk out the door.
Thank you, Jane. I want to give you this sweatshirt and little bag.
Excellent.
Yeah, just appreciation for you coming. I mean, it wasn't a direct path on its way to Montana, so I really appreciate him going a little off path to have this conversation with us, because I think, like what you said, you know, we do have a very heavily based tourism economy, but as we all know, it's very good to have diversification in how we exist as a community. And I think there is a lot of room for the stewardship economy to become a much more active part of the work that we have to do here, because so many of us in so many ways are so connected to the land. So I appreciate the beginning of this conversation. I look forward to where we as a community take it. And I think it poses for each of us probably some questions as we think about things that we read in the paper, or opportunities we may have with our elected officials in speaking up about some of these things. So Yeah.
Thanks,
Yeah.
it's great to be
So
here.
excited.
And I mean, she does incredible work, so I was inspired to come here because of her presentation at our